Nusra, in the exhibited work, you've used the self-image in a repeated form. Can you talk about this usage?
For this work, I used a very simple, very basic passport photo that I had taken about 5 years ago. And in that, I used it because it's a very neutral, almost bland photograph. I think the choice of this photograph was determined by the theme of the work, and I wanted to explore the history and art history and its relationship to the artist, and in this case, of course, it's me. But in general, it also looks at how artists look at the world and look at themselves and use their selves. People ask sometimes, who's that boy? I like that reaction as well, because it sort of points to that sort of ambiguity or neutrality that I was probably aiming at.
In the work, you've used the eye and that idea of the gaze. You've lined up this within the work. Is there a reason for this?
Very, very, very strong device, which has been used a lot historically in portraiture and self-portrait especially, where the artist is looking at him or herself in the mirror and then painting. It offers a very interesting insight into artist's world, a very sacred or sometimes protected world. And gaze is one way of probably engaging and opening up that dialogue. And that is done through self-portraiture. And I use that device to establish a contact or a beginning of a dialogue with the audience, with the viewer. And for the portraits, I aligned my eye, one eye or both eyes with the superimposed image, which are historical paintings. And in that sense, it's sort of the double gaze, or you don't know which is which or which layer do you see first. And it's always confusing for me. I sometimes see my own face and sometimes I see the second layer. So it probably depends on the time and the way you're looking at it, that which layer comes out first. But the eye is where it's sort of joined and the forces are joined in a way.
Can you talk about some of the images that you have used in this work?
This project was basically done for the 53rd Venice Biennale, and it was part of one of the collateral events. So I started choosing the images around Venetian history. And I first came up with a lot of landscapes and depictions of Venice. And then it didn't really work technically. It was such a different format. It didn't go really well with the self or the face as such. So I started looking for portraits and ended up finding some that were painted by Venetian artists or Italian artists who at some stage were based in Venice or had some connection. And among those works, then I tried to find the portraits or the faces that were looking directly out at the viewer. And most of them do. Not all of them, but most of them do. So that was one criteria. And then I chose some miniature paintings from 17th century, partly because I'm trained in that tradition and partly because of the similarity between the Venetian Empire and the Mughal Empire. Similar sort of decadent tastes and patronage of the arts and interest in architecture, and a lot of bloody wars and all that history as well.
The work in the exhibition is a large digital print. Do you always work with digital prints and on this scale?
Most of my previous work has been painting and some forms of digital printmaking or conventional printmaking and some installations. But this one was, I think, partly decided by the format of the exhibition and the venue. There was a 3-part sort of wall that was erected for the whole, a whole set of walls that roughly followed an Islamic pattern, and I got one part of it. So it was displayed on that in a very old historical building, as every building in Venice happens to be. So that was partly why I was able to do it. As long as the technical side of things are resolved, I'm happy to venture out in other formats and large formats and different techniques.
Can you talk generally about the themes that you do focus on in your work?
So without labeling my own work, I'll just say what I usually like to deal with. I try a lot to find a lot of issues that are partially ignored, or historical themes or reinterpretation of certain ideas, political ideas or historical ideas, or history itself, political and social history. And I look at a lot of colonial legacy, and a lot of my commentary is from a woman's point of view, as I believe that women see things differently. They don't go out fighting wars, generally speaking, and they wouldn't attack any other territory for no good reason, let alone a whole country or a whole group of people or cultures. So that said, I really like to distinguish in my work sometimes that women look at things differently, and I try to use certain symbols and forms to dictate that idea.
Your home is now in Melbourne. Now living in Australia, have you seen this location as influencing your work?
In some ways, on a very basic level, just light is very different in this country, and it's amazing. You look at things really differently, and the sense of space that's completely unlike an Asian sense of space, where the other person would sit or stand really close to you, and which I was used to, though I didn't like it. And here in Australia, everybody has a sort of a luxurious amount of space around them, which is, I think, which determines a lot of our way of seeing the world as well, and it has definitely influenced me, especially when you translate it into wider political issues. Like, we think we are isolated, and we think that we are a tiny island nation which can be attacked from all this world, especially Asia, which is so untrue. We are a huge piece of land, and we are so far away, and we are not going to be attacked by zillions of people arriving on boats. At one stage, I really started looking at how people who first arrived on this land, especially European arrivals, how they were looking at this space. And I've just begun to explore that. What was their relationship to the physical landscape and the physical harshness of this land, and how it translates into current Australian culture, how we relate to our own space, and how there are certain expectations when new migrants arrive. What do we expect from them? And now I can understand a lot of attitudes that were thrown at me when I arrived, newly arrived. And it is a different land, definitely.